Out of This World by Neville Goddard. Los Angeles, 1949. Read by Josiah Brandt. Chapter 1. Thinking Fourth Dimensionally. And now I have told you before it come to pass, that, when it is come to pass, ye might believe. John 14:29. Many persons, myself included, have observed events before they occurred. That is, before they occurred in this world of 3 dimensions. Since man can observe an event before it occurs in the 3 dimensions of space, life on Earth must proceed according to plan. And this plan must exist elsewhere in another dimension and be slowly moving through our space. If the occurring events were not in this world when they were observed, then, to be perfectly logical, they must have been out of this world. And whatever is there to be seen before it occurs here must be predetermined from the point of view of man awake in a 3-dimensional world. Again, if the occurring events were not in this world when they were observed, then, to be perfectly logical, they must have been out of this world. And whatever is there to be seen before it occurs here must be predetermined from the point of view of man awake in a 3-dimensional world. So what Neville is saying here is that if you can observe an event before it happens using your mind's eye or your imagination, then that event must be happening somewhere else that isn't here in the 3-dimensional world, but it must be happening somewhere. And he says it must be predetermined somewhere else, and then it happens 3-dimensionally here. Thus, the question arises, are we able to alter our future? My object in writing these pages is to indicate possibilities inherent in man, to show that man can alter his future, but, thus altered, it forms again a deterministic sequence starting from the point of interference, a future that will be consistent with the alteration. So what he is saying here is that man, in his experience, can alter his future, but once that alteration is made, the future starts to self-generate itself again from that point of interference forward. The most remarkable feature of man's future is its flexibility. It is determined by his attitudes rather than by his acts. The cornerstone on which all things are based is man's concept of himself. He acts as he does and has the experiences that he does because his concept of himself is what it is, and for no other reason. Had he a different concept of self, he would act differently. A change of concept of self automatically alters his future, and a change in any terms of his future series of experiences reciprocally alters his concept of self. Again, the cornerstone on which all things are based is man's concept of himself. He acts as he does and has the experiences that he does because his concept of himself is what it is, and for no other reason. Had he a different concept of himself, he would act differently. A change of concept of self automatically alters his future. And a change in any term of his future series of experiences reciprocally alters his concept of himself. Man's assumptions, which he regards as insignificant, produce effects that are considerable. Therefore, man should revise his estimate of an assumption and recognize its creative power. I like that what he says here is that the most remarkable feature of a man's future is its flexibility. And he says that the future absolutely can be altered, and it all depends on a man's concept of himself. And a change of concept of self will automatically alter the future, and a change in the future alters the concept of the self. So the whole thing is reciprocal and works together to shift the experience of life, all based on how you see yourself. He says, even though man assumes that his assumptions are insignificant, they are in fact considerable. They have considerable effect, and that we should recognize the creative power of our assumptions. All changes take place in consciousness. The future, although prepared in every detail in advance, has several outcomes. At every moment of our lives, we have before us the choice of which of several futures we will choose. There are two actual outlooks on the world possessed by everyone: a natural focus and a spiritual focus. The ancient teachers called the one the carnal mind, and the other the mind of Christ. We may differentiate them as ordinary waking consciousness governed by our senses and a controlled imagination governed by desire. We recognize these two distinct centers of thought in the statement, "The natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them, for they are spiritually discerned." The natural view confines reality to the moment called now. To the natural view, the past and the future are purely imaginary. The spiritual view, on the other hand, sees the contents of time. It sees events as distinct and separated as objects in space. The past and the future are a present whole to the spiritual view. What is mental and subjective to the natural man is concrete and objective to the spiritual man. So here he's talking about how there's two ways to look at the world. One is the world that you can see with your senses, the world right around you in the present moment of now. And when you're fully invested in that primary natural world, then your entirety of focus is on what is immediately around you. And anything in the past or anything in the future seems to be imaginary, either a memory or something that hasn't happened yet. But he says the second way to look at the world is with a spiritual focus. And with the spiritual focus, you can see the contents of time. It's an expanded view on the timeline of your life. It's an expanded comprehension of how one event leads to another, as though hopping from distinct and specific objects in time and space, hopping along those are the events of the timeline of your life. And when you take a spiritual view on your life, your whole life is one coherent whole, as opposed to the natural view where you're stuck in a little piece of it and not really comprehending how it all fits together with the other parts of your life. The habit of seeing only that which our senses permit renders us totally blind to what we otherwise could see. To cultivate the faculty of seeing the invisible, we should often deliberately disentangle our minds from the evidence of the senses and focus our attention on an invisible state, mentally feeling it and sensing it until it has all the distinctness of reality. So imagination is a skill that you can grow, that you can develop. It's a muscle that you can exercise. And he talks about to cultivate the faculty. So to grow the skill or to exercise the muscle, strengthen the muscle of seeing the invisible, or in other words, the spiritual view or the mind's eye, the third eye, we should deliberately disentangle our minds from the evidence of the senses. And he says we should deliberately and do it often. So we should set aside specific time to shut off our senses of the world around us. This is the meditative state or controlled reverie, and go within and create a world and make it so real that to us it's just as real as the outside world. And that's how we grow and cultivate this skill of imagination. Earnest, concentrated thought, focused in a particular direction, shuts out other sensations and causes them to disappear. We have but to concentrate on the state desired in order to see it. The habit of withdrawing attention from the region of sensation and concentrating it on the invisible develops our spiritual outlook and enables us to penetrate beyond the world of sense and to see that which is invisible. Again, earnest, concentrated thought, focused in a particular direction, shuts out other sensations and causes them to disappear. We have but to concentrate on the state desired in order to see it. The habit of withdrawing attention from the region of sensation and concentrating it on the invisible develops our spiritual outlook and enables us to penetrate beyond the world of sense and to see that which is invisible. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen. Romans 1:20. This vision is completely independent of the natural faculties. Open it and quicken it. Without it, these instructions are useless, for the things of the Spirit are spiritually discerned. So he's talking about entering that controlled imaginary state, that state of controlled reverie or the meditative state. And the way that he does that, if you haven't heard him talk about it, he says to lie down with your head flat on a bed or a couch and close your eyes and reduce your sense of your body, reduce your sense of the room around you, and create an imaginary world to step into. And he's talking about how the habit, and he uses that word on purpose, trust me, the habit of doing that, of withdrawing your attention from the world around you, from the world of your senses, and concentrating on something invisible, develops your spiritual vision, your ability to see what isn't there. And he encourages you to open it and quicken it. For the things of the Spirit are spiritually discerned, meaning you can only experience this by actually doing it. A little practice will convince us that we can, by controlling our imagination, reshape our future in harmony with our desire. Desire is the mainspring of action. We could not move a single finger unless we had a desire to move it. No matter what we do, we follow the desire which at the moment dominates our minds. When we break a habit, our desire to break it is greater than our desire to continue in the habit. Again, a little practice will convince us that we can, by controlling our imagination, reshape our future in harmony with our desire. Desire is the mainspring of action. We could not move a single finger unless we had a desire to move it. No matter what we do, we follow the desire which at the moment dominates our minds. When we break a habit, our desire to break it is greater than our desire to continue in the habit. The desires which impel us to action are those that hold our attention. A desire is but an awareness of something we lack or need to make our life more enjoyable. Desires always have some personal gain in view. The greater the anticipated gain, the more intense is the desire. There is absolutely no unselfish desire. When there is nothing to gain, there is no desire, and consequently, no action. So he's talking about how desire is the most important part of this whole paradigm that he's constructing here about using imagination to create reality. If you don't have a strong desire, you won't be compelled to act on this information. And really, you're at any given point in your life, you're only ever acting on your desires. According to what he says here, even when you break a habit, the only reason you're breaking the habit is because your desire to break the habit finally exceeds your desire to continue in the habit. So the desire is a very important part of this equation. The spiritual man speaks to the natural man through the language of desire. The key to progress in life and to the fulfillment of dreams lies in ready obedience to its voice. Unhesitating obedience to its voice is an immediate assumption of the wish fulfilled. To desire a state is to have it. As Pascal has said, "You would not have sought me had you not already found me." Man, by assuming the feeling of his wish fulfilled and then living and acting on this conviction, alters the future in harmony with his assumption. Okay, there are layers in this paragraph right here. So I'm going to go through it again a little bit more slowly. The spiritual man speaks to the natural man through the language of desire. So if you're familiar with the concept of a higher self and a lower self, the idea is that in general waking consciousness, most of what we do is piloted on autopilot more or less by our lower self. And our higher self is the self that has planned out a life for us. It's generally of service to others in one way or another. and is kind of helping us navigate towards creating that life and stepping into that life by dropping little road signs along the way. And those road signs, some of those road signs are desires. So that's an example of the spiritual man, which is the higher self, or the higher senses, communicating to the lower self, or the natural man, which is just the language of desires. Anybody can speak the language of desire. Oh, I want something to eat. I'm thirsty. I want something to drink. That is the universal language. And the idea is that the desires that you have in your heart are little guides towards your highest happiness and highest fulfillment, particularly when they feel like natural inclinations. If this desire is a natural inclination for you, it's from your higher self, and your higher self is giving you that desire to help you navigate towards that state, to help you embody that person that your higher self is building you to be. So he says the spiritual man speaks to the natural man through the language of desire. The key to progress in life and the fulfillment of dreams lies in ready obedience to its voice. So the idea here is that if you want progress in your life and you want to fulfill your dreams, you listen to the voice of your desires. And in some cases, that means listening to your desires no matter what, as long as they feel like natural inclinations. And if you can ask the question, is this best for me? And answer that, yes, this is good for me, this is best for me. Natural desires, the idea is to immediately be obedient to them. So how do you immediately be obedient to a desire? It's like the idea of deciding that you want something, and instead of saying, oh man, and coming up with some reason why you can't have it, taking a minute to imagine that it's in your life already. Imagine what your life looks like now that you have it. So instead of wanting something and then deciding you can't have it, you want something and then you become it. And then it shows up in your life. Unhesitating obedience to its voice is an immediate assumption of the wish fulfilled. To desire a state is to have it. Man, by assuming the feeling of his wish fulfilled and then living and acting on this conviction, alters the future in harmony with his assumption. Assumptions awaken what they affirm. Again, assumptions awaken what they affirm. As soon as man assumes the feeling of his wish fulfilled, his four-dimensional self finds ways for the attainment of this end, discovers methods for its realization. I know of no clearer definition of the means by which we realize our desires than to experience in imagination what we would experience in the flesh were we to achieve our goal. This experience of the end wills the means. With its larger outlook, the four-dimensional self then constructs the means necessary to realize the accepted end. So he starts the paragraph by saying, assumptions awaken what they affirm. What does that mean? When you assume that someone else is going to be kind and treat you respectfully, you begin to wake up kindness and respect in their heart simply by extending them the benefit of the doubt, right? I don't know if you've ever seen this in action where you meet somebody new and you don't really know what to expect, but by extending them the benefit of the doubt and making it clear that you're not going to judge them simply based on how they show up, you actually end up having a better experience. You actually wake up the kind and respectful part of them. So that's one example. says, as soon as man assumes the feeling of his wish fulfilled, his four-dimensional self finds ways for the attainment of this end. It discovers methods for the realization. So the idea here is that when you realize that you have a desire and then you become that desire and step into that feeling of already having whatever it is that you want, now your fourth dimensional self starts working on its higher level of the chess match to organize and bring whatever it is that you want into your life, because you have willed the means by assuming the end. And he says, this is such a great sentence here. He says, I know of no clearer definition of the means by which we realize our desires than to experience in imagination what we would experience in the flesh were we to achieve our goal. So the idea here is to spend a little time every single day in imagination, in a controlled waking dream, laying on the couch in a reduced senses, meditative type state, to experience in your imagination being and living within and being the lifestyle that you want to be, the lifestyle that you want to experience, the life that you want to live. Experience it first in imagination, become it, and live it in imagination, and then allow the higher fourth dimensional self to create the means for your actual three-dimensional world. The undisciplined mind finds it difficult to assume a state which is denied by the senses. Here is a technique that makes it easy to encounter events before they occur, to call things which are not seen as though they were. People have a habit of slighting the importance of simple things. But this simple formula for changing the future was discovered after years of searching and experimenting. The first step in changing the future is desire. That is, define your objective. Know definitely what you want. Secondly, construct an event which you believe you would encounter following the fulfillment of your desire. An event which implies fulfillment of your desire, something which will have the action of self predominant. Thirdly, immobilize the physical body and induce a condition akin to sleep. Lie on a bed or relax in a chair and imagine that you are sleepy. Then, with eyelids closed and your attention focused on the action you intend to experience in imagination, mentally feel yourself right into the proposed action, imagining all the while that you are actually performing the action here and now. You must always participate in the imaginary action, not merely stand back and look on. But you must feel that you are actually performing the action so that the imaginary sensation is real to you. Okay, so he says the undisciplined mind, or basically the mind that doesn't practice and exercise this ability, finds it difficult to assume a state which is denied by the senses. This imagination is a muscle that you have to exercise. It's a skill that you have to grow. And it becomes much easier to pretend being something that you're not, at least not by what you can define, with what you can touch, taste, smell, and speak about, right? It's easier to become something that you're not physically in your imagination when you practice. And then he gives his technique to encounter events before they occur, or basically to go into your imagination or your third eye and speak to the spiritual man, or create the future, see the future before it happens, more precisely. So he says this is the formula. The first is desire, and we talked a little bit about how important desire is. The first step in changing the future is desire. Define your objective. Know definitely what you want. So the way to do this, for those of you that you're not even really sure what to ask for, there's a technique called painting your dreams that I hope to get into in the future. But it's the idea that before you do any of this, where you spend time actually trying to create something, the first place to start is to get really, really clear on what you want to create. Because if you believe in the power of this, it is the most powerful thing imaginable, literally. So you can create anything, and with that kind of power, it only makes sense to be wise about what you want to create. So, about what you choose to create. So it makes a lot of sense, in my opinion, to spend time stepping outside of your ego, purifying and clarifying your mind, your heart, and your thoughts, and getting really, really clear on what you want to create. Not just for selfish means, although you can use the law for that too, but I advocate a higher use of the law. I think that the law should be used to build a life of meaningful service. That's just my take on it. He says that once you have a clear desire in mind, the next step is to construct an event which has the action of self-predominance. So basically what he's saying is, all right, imagine that you are now that person. So boom, genie pops out, wish granted, you are that person. What would you do? And you need to be able to answer that question really clearly, so clearly, in fact, that you actually create an imaginal scene that you can describe the details of. You can start to tell like it was a story, like it was something that actually happened in your life. Because you spent the time in your imagination creating it, you could actually describe to a friend exactly where you are, exactly what the first thing is that you would do. If you got a phone call and found out that your wish was fulfilled, granted, boom, just like that. What are you doing? You can describe it. So you go ahead and you create that imaginal picture of what your world looks like now that your wish has been granted. And you feel that that is true. And then once you've constructed this event, and it says your action of self should be predominant. So this is very important to help you feel that it is real and not just a TV show that you're watching in your imagination. You need to actually be doing something in your imagination. So one of my favorite techniques for this personally is I imagine calling my friends and loved ones and telling them the great story, telling them the whatever has happened to me. That was synchronistic, that is evidence of my desire coming true, my wish being fulfilled. So I get all excited about it, and then I imagine in my head that I'm pulling out my cell phone and I'm calling someone to tell them about it. And I have a whole imaginary conversation in my mental imaginary world, believing that this is true. And I tell them all about it, and I let the conversation, grow and evolve and take different courses, and I can hear the other person's voice, and it's fantastic. It's amazing. And it works really well at evoking that feeling. And yes, it does also meet the criteria of having the action of self-predominant, or being an action that you're imagining. So it says, with your eyelids closed and your attention focused on the action you intend to experience in imagination, mentally feel yourself right into the proposed action, making that phone call, having that conversation. Imagining all the while that you are actually performing the action here and now. And the whole point is that the imaginary sensation needs to feel real to you. Make it real. Spend some time exercising this muscle. And the more you exercise, the more you grow the skill, the more real it'll feel. It is important to always remember that the proposed action must be one which follows the fulfillment of your desire. And also, you must feel yourself into the action until it has all the vividness and distinctness of reality. For example, suppose you desired promotion in office. Being congratulated would be an event you would encounter following the fulfillment of your desire. Having selected this action as the one you will experience in imagination, immobilize the physical body and induce a state akin to sleep, a drowsy state, but one in which you are still able to control the direction of your thoughts, a state in which you are attentive without effort. Now, imagine that a friend is standing before you. Put your imaginary hand into his. Feel it to be solid and real. Then, carry on an imaginary conversation with him in harmony with the action. Do not visualize yourself at a distance in point of space and at a distance in point of time being congratulated on your good fortune. Instead, make elsewhere here and the future now. The future event is a reality now in a dimensionally larger world. And, oddly enough, now in a dimensionally larger world is equivalent to here in the ordinary three-dimensional space of everyday life. The difference between feeling yourself in action, here and now, and visualizing yourself in action, as though you were on a motion picture screen, is the difference between success and failure. The difference will be appreciated if you will now visualize yourself climbing a ladder. Then, with eyelids closed, imagine that a ladder is right in front of you and feel you are actually climbing it. Okay, so here he gives the example of wanting a promotion in office. So he says being congratulated is an event that you would naturally encounter following the fulfillment of your desires. So it's the idea, oh, got a promotion. So you imagine your friend is standing in front of you and you go to shake his hand and you say, hey, yeah, I got a promotion and I'm excited because of this and that. And the other friend, you hear his voice and he's all excited for you. It's one way to do it because it's a simple one. And it seems to be a technique that Neville jumps to a lot, the idea of being congratulated for something. And in that regard, it's not unlike my idea of the telephone call. Imagine that I'm calling someone here and now. It's the same thing. It's just, I'm making it modern using a cell phone. But there's other situations that you can imagine as well. So for instance, getting a new and better job or getting a promotion in office, maybe you would have to change your office, move offices, move cubicles, something like that. Maybe you drive a different commute to work or something like that. So you can imagine any of those type scenarios. Imagine that, you're packing your things at your desk into a little box, and inside you're feeling so happy and so excited that you got your promotion, that you got your pay raise, that you got the duties that you really enjoy doing. Whatever those feelings are that you really want to feel them, and then imagine a event associated with them and make that future event here and now. And he says the difference between success and failure is whether or not you make the future here and now and imagine that you're doing it right now, or whether you imagine that it's then and you see yourself like on a movie screen doing it. So the whole point is that you are literally hacking the way that reality is created. You're hacking your subconscious by telling your subconscious that the event has already happened. And if the event has already happened, the subconscious naturally reorganizes your life in a way to allow that event to actually happen in the third dimension, to mirror the fourth dimension. So that's the as above, so below, as within, so without, etc. He finishes this paragraph, it's a lengthy paragraph, by talking about the difference will be appreciated if you will visualize yourself climbing a ladder. Now, from some of the Neville research I've done in some of his classes in LA, he actually used the visualization of climbing a ladder as a way to teach people the reality of imagining creates reality. So what he would do is he would coach his students who were coming night after night to his workshops. He would coach his students and he would say, every night as you fall asleep this week, I want you to imagine that you're climbing a ladder. In your mind's eye, one hand after another, one foot after another, you're climbing up the ladder, right? So you'd have them do that for a week. And then he says there'll be a second meeting a week later. And that meeting is only open to people who have actually climbed a ladder in real life in the last week since doing this imaginal exercise. And the guy who was telling the story about having taken this course with Neville said that through a random coincidence, he found himself climbing up a ladder at his parents' house without even realizing what he was doing, just a couple of days after having started this experiment. And he said he was 2 steps up on the ladder and he was holding a can of paint and he looked down and he thought, oh my God, it worked. I am standing on a ladder and this totally just happened as a coincidence from falling asleep each night, imagining that I'm climbing a ladder. Whoa. So again, kind of a Neville go-to, the idea of climbing a ladder. He's used that before in his events as well, using that as an example. So if you're into ladders, maybe you try it. Desire, physical immobility bordering on sleep, and imaginary action in which self-feelingly predominates, here and now, are not only important factors in altering the future, but they are essential conditions in consciously projecting the spiritual self. If, when the physical body is immobilized, we become possessed of the idea to do something, and imagine that we are doing it here and now, and keep the imaginary action feelingly going right up until sleep ensues, we are likely to awaken out of the physical body to find ourselves in a dimensionally larger world with a dimensionally larger focus and actually doing what we desired and imagined we were doing in the flesh. But whether we awaken there or not, we are actually performing the action in the 4th dimensional world, and we will reenact it in the future, here in the 3rd dimensional world. Okay, that was a pretty thick paragraph there. So he says the 3 ingredients to using your imagination to create your reality are desire, physical immobility bordering on sleep, or that meditative state, and imaginary action in which the self predominates feelingly, right? So assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled and then doing something that you would do if you had what you wanted or were who you wanted to be. Here and now, making the future here and now, right? Those are the 3. Physical immobility, imaginary action, feelingly done by yourself, and the here and now. And he says they are essential conditions in projecting the spiritual self. So there's the idea that this higher self can project itself onto the lower self or through the lower self. And he says that these 3 ways are also ways to do that. There are 3 ways of communicating with that higher self and allowing it to project as the lower self. And he says that if we do these 3 things and we continue to do the action that we're imagining that we're doing in the 4th dimensional plane, if we keep doing it as we fall asleep, there's a chance that we awaken out of the physical body on the astral plane. That's what he means by a dimensionally larger world. He's not using the word astral. This book may have predated the word astral. I'd have to look that up, but this book was written in 1949, and a lot of astral plane, astral travel, astral dreaming, astral projection type stuff started being written maybe 20 years later, 10 to 20 years later. So I think that's what he means, though, is the astral world with a dimensionally larger focus and actually doing what we desired or imagined we were doing in the flesh. So basically what he's saying is that when you do this imaginal act, you're going to a larger dimensional realm, the fourth dimension, and you're creating something for yourself in the fourth dimension. And then the idea is that if you are doing that as you fall asleep, as you slip into that subconscious, you can actually wake up in the fourth dimension conscious, and you're doing it there. But regardless of whether you actually move your consciousness into the astral plane in the state of sleep and are doing it or not, either way, when you're acting out this scenario, you are still creating it on that fourth dimensional level. And it says, whether we awaken in the fourth dimensional or astral plane or not, we will reenact here in the third dimensional world the action that we carried out in the fourth dimensional plane. Experience has taught me to restrict the imaginary action, to condense the idea, which is to be the object of our meditation, into a single act, and to reenact it over and over again until it has the feeling of reality. Otherwise, the attention will wander off along an associational track, and hosts of associated images will be presented to our attention. In a few seconds, they will lead us hundreds of miles away from our objective in point of space and years away in point of time. If we decide to climb a particular flight of stairs, because that is the likely event to follow the realization of our desire, then we must restrict the action to climbing that particular flight of stairs. Should our attention wander off, we must bring it back to its task of climbing that flight of stairs and keep on doing so until the imaginary action has all the solidity and distinctness of reality. The idea must be maintained in the field of presentation without any sensible effort on our part. We must, with the minimum of effort, permeate the mind with the feeling of the wish fulfilled. So the important point to make out of this paragraph is he says, if we decide to climb a particular flight of stairs because that is the event likely to follow the realization of our desire, then we must restrict the action to climbing that particular flight of stairs. Now, it's not just imagining in your mind that you're climbing one stair after another. That's not the point. The point is to feel the feeling of joy, the feeling of freedom, the feeling of elation, the feeling of empowerment, whatever those emotions are, whatever those feelings are that are flooding through your whole body while you're climbing these stairs because you're so excited that what just happened in three-dimensional reality, and you can touch, taste, and smell it, and you can see it with your own physical eyes. You get that excitement going, and then with that excitement being the predominant feeling in your consciousness, then you climb the stairs, right? Get the feeling going and then climb the stairs. And again, if the attention wanders, bring it back. Draw up that feeling within you again, climb the stairs again, and reenact that over and over again until ideally you fall off to sleep. The goal is to permeate the mind, to saturate the mind, to flood the mind. With minimum of effort, flood the mind with the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Drowsiness facilitates change because it favors attention without effort. But it must not be pushed to the stage of sleep, in which we shall no longer be able to control the movements of our attention, but rather a moderate degree of drowsiness in which we are still able to direct our thoughts. A most effective way to embody a desire is to assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled and then, in a relaxed and sleepy state, repeat over and over again, like a lullaby, any short phrase which implies fulfillment of our desire, such as, "Thank you," as though we addressed a higher power for having done it for us. If, however, we seek a conscious projection into a dimensionally larger world, then we must keep the action going right up until sleep ensues. So I've often noticed as I start to fall asleep, right at first when I close my eyes and shut off my body, I have pretty good control of my attention. But as my brainwave state drops and I start to shift out of through the brainwave state, so out of beta into alpha and then down towards the sleepy states, slower and slower brainwaves, it gets trickier to control my attention. And like he says, within a second, I can be led miles away from the place in point of space of where I'm trying to create with my imagination. So one way to address this is to do your meditation when you're not actually tired. So even when you're feeling, full of energy, maybe the day has just started, maybe you just had a cup of coffee, and then that's when you lay down, shut off your body, keep your mind awake, and create your imaginal picture and experience it. And most importantly, feel the feelings. It's the most important part. You're communicating to your subconscious the feelings that you desire to create. You're using the details of a mental picture to associate with those feelings. And that's this association link that you're providing to the subconscious. You're taking the feelings and the storyline, putting them together, and then giving this to the subconscious and saying, this is the seed that I'm planting. I would like this to grow in my three-dimensional reality. So he says you want to assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled and then relaxed and sleepily say over and over again, "Thank you, thank you, thank you," while just feeling that feeling all of those feelings. And he says you can then break it and come back to the three-dimensional reality, or if you want a conscious projection into a dimensionally larger world, if you want to basically astral project into the astral plane with this desire, and you want to carry it with you into it, then you continue to do that feeling, feel that action, do that action with that feeling state as you fall asleep. And the idea is you can carry it into the dream state. Now that does take practice, but again, imagination is like a muscle you can exercise. Simply by practicing, you can start to do some pretty cool stuff. Experience in imagination, with all the distinctness of reality, what would be experienced in the flesh were you to achieve your goal. And you shall, in time, meet it in the flesh as you met it in your imagination. Feed the mind with premises. That is, assertions presumed to be true. Because assumptions, though unreal to the senses, if persisted in, until they have the feeling of reality, will harden into facts. To an assumption, all means which promote its realization are good. It influences the behavior of all by inspiring in all the movements, the actions, and the words which tend towards its fulfillment. Again, experience in imagination, with all the distinctness of reality, what would be experienced in the flesh were you to achieve your goal. And you shall, in time, meet it in the flesh as you met it in your imagination. Feed the mind with premises, that is, assertions presumed to be true. because assumptions, though unreal to the senses, if persisted in, until they have the feeling of reality, will harden into fact. To an assumption, all means which promote its realization are good. It influences the behavior of all by inspiring in all the movements, the actions, and the words which tend toward its fulfillment. To understand how man molds his future in harmony with his assumption, we must know what we mean by a dimensionally larger world. For it is a dimensionally larger world that we go to alter our future. The observation of an event before it occurs implies that the event is predetermined from the point of view of man in the three-dimensional world. Therefore, to change the conditions here in the 3 dimensions of space, we must first change them in the 4 dimensions of space. Man does not know exactly what is meant by a dimensionally larger world, and he would no doubt deny the existence of a dimensionally larger self. He is quite familiar with the 3 dimensions of length, width, and height, and he feels that if there were a 4th dimension, it should be just as obvious to him as the dimensions of length, width, and height. A dimension is not a line. It is a way in which a thing can be measured that is entirely different from all other ways. That is, to measure a solid 4th dimensionally, we simply measure it in any direction except that of its length, width, and height. Is there another way of measuring an object other than those of its length, width, and height? Time measures my life without employing the 3 dimensions of length, width, and height. There is no such thing as an instantaneous object. Its appearance and disappearance are measurable. It endures for a definite length of time. We can measure its lifespan without using the dimensions of length, width, and height. Time is definitely a 4th way of measuring an object. The more dimensions an object has, the more substantial and real it becomes. A straight line, which lies entirely in 1 dimension, acquires shape, mass, and substance by the addition of dimensions. What new quality would time, the 4th dimension, give, which would make it just as vastly superior to solids as solids are to surfaces and surfaces are to lines? Time is a medium for changes in experience, because all changes take time. The new quality is changeability. Okay, so what he's saying here is he's talking about a dimensionally larger world, a world that can be measured by more than just length, width, and height, like the 3rd dimension can. And he says that the 4th dimension would be the dimension of time. And the way that he came up with that was, if you can measure any object length, width, and height, if you're going to measure it another way, it would literally be any way but that. And he thinks that time is a true 4th way of measuring any object. And he gives the example of time measures my life, without employing 3 dimensions of length, width, and height. But he says you can measure a lifespan, and that time is thus a fourth way of measuring an object. But he says really what time is changeability. That's what he's using time as a reference to. Time is a medium for changes in experience, because all changes take time. So for one object to change its appearance from being one way to being another way takes time. So that's the other way to measure an object. And the quality that time measures is changeability. Observe that if we bisect a solid, its cross-section will be a surface. By bisecting a surface, we obtain a line. And by bisecting a line, we get a point. This means that a point is but a cross-section of a line, which is, in turn, but a cross-section of a surface, which is, in turn, but a cross-section of a solid, which is, in turn, if carried to its logical conclusion, but a cross-section of a 4-dimensional object. We cannot avoid the inference that all 3-dimensional objects are but cross-sections of 4-dimensional bodies. Which means, when I meet you, I meet a cross-section of the 4-dimensional you, the 4-dimensional self that is not seen. To see the 4th-dimensional self, I must see every cross-section or moment of your life from birth to death, and see them all as coexisting. My focus should take in the entire array of sensory impressions which you have experienced on Earth, plus those you might encounter. I should see them, not in the order in which they were experienced by you, but as a present whole. Because change is the characteristic of the 4th dimension, I should see them in a state of flux, as a living, animated whole. Again, we cannot avoid the inference that all 3-dimensional objects are but cross-sections of 4-dimensional bodies. Which means, when I meet you, I meet a cross-section of the 4-dimensional you, the 4-dimensional self that is not seen. To see the 4-dimensional self, I must see every cross-section or moment of your life from birth to death, and see them all as coexisting. My focus should take in the entire array of sensory impressions which you have experienced on Earth, plus those you might encounter. I should see them not in the order they were experienced by you, but as a present whole. Because change is the characteristic of the 4th dimension, I should see them in a state of flux, as a living, animated whole. So he's talking about how when you meet someone, yes, you're seeing their length, their width, their height, and their depth, but you're also seeing something else. You're seeing them in a snapshot of time. You're just seeing a glimpse because they are but a fragment, but a cross-section of a 4th-dimensional being. And you're running into them in the 3rd dimension, which means you're only getting a cross-section of that 4th dimension. And that 4th dimension is time or change. So really, if you were going to meet an entire person, you wouldn't just meet the person that walks into the room with you. You would meet the person that walks into the room with you, and you would also see them as the entirety of everything they've ever been on earth and everything they ever will be on earth, all existing in the present now as one. And that is a beautiful description of your fourth dimensional self. Each of us has a fourth dimensional self, and this three-dimensional self that you're looking at is but a cross-section of my fourth dimensional self, separated by time. And time is the medium through which we experience change. So really, I am all of this, and you're just seeing me here, and you're seeing a cross-section as I change from here to here along the continuum. But really, in the end, I am all of it. I'm all of this, my entire lifespan. If we have all this clearly fixed in our minds, what does it mean to us in this three-dimensional world? It means that if we can move along time's length, we can see the future and alter it as we so desire. This world, which we think so solidly real, is a shadow, out of which and beyond which we may at any time pass. It is an abstraction from a more fundamental and dimensionally larger world. A more fundamental world abstracted from a still more fundamental and dimensionally larger world, and so on to infinity. The absolute is unattainable by any means or analysis, no matter how many dimensions we add to the world. Man can prove the existence of a dimensionally larger world simply by focusing his attention on an invisible state and imagining that he sees and feels it. If he remains concentrated in this state, his present environment will pass away, and he will awaken in a dimensionally larger world where the object of his contemplation will be seen as a concrete objective reality. Intuitively, I feel that, were he to abstract his thoughts from this dimensionally larger world and retreat still farther within his mind, he would again bring about an externalization of time. He would discover that every time he retreats into his inner mind and brings about an externalization of time, space becomes dimensionally larger. And he would, therefore, conclude that both time and space are serial, and that the drama of life is but the climbing of a multitudinous dimensional time block. Again, man can prove the existence of a dimensionally larger world simply by focusing his attention on an invisible state and imagining that he sees and feels it. If he remains concentrated in this state, his present environment will pass away, and he will awaken in a dimensionally larger world where the object of his contemplation will be seen as a concrete objective reality. Intuitively, I feel that, were he to abstract his thoughts from this dimensionally larger world and retreat still further within his mind, he would again bring about an externalization of time. He would discover that every time he retreats into his inner mind and brings about an externalization of time, space becomes dimensionally larger. And he would, therefore, conclude that both time and space are serial, and that the drama of life is but the climbing of a multitudinous dimensional time block. Scientists will one day explain why there is a serial universe. But in practice, how we use this serial universe to change the future is more important. To change the future, we need only concern ourselves with two worlds in the infinite series. The world we know by reason of our bodily organs, and the world we perceive independently of our bodily organs. So that's the end of chapter 1 of Out of This World. Chapter 1, called Thinking Fourth Dimensionally. And I would like to know what you think. Do you think fourth dimensionally? Do you like the commentary on these videos, or would you prefer that I stick to just Neville's words? Let me know in the comments. Love to hear from you. Subscribe to this channel so that you will receive notifications on your device when new Neville Goddard content is posted.